said that I have two alternatives: either go to jail or go to the army. But I would like to say that there is another alternative, and that alternative is justice.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Think Global podcast. I am your host, International Seth, and today with me, we got a new guest, my man, Dr. Jibril Latif. Hey, man, it feels really, really good to call you doctor, man. MashaAllah, congratulations on that.
Yeah, like I told my mom, if I get sick, I call a real doctor.
Well, welcome to the Think Global podcast, man. I know it's your first time coming on the show, but look forward to some episodes, yeah. And we'll definitely have you come on occasionally and get your insight on everything that's going on. Breaking news today, as we're recording this, we just found out that Joe Biden has become the 46th president of the United States. Whether number 45 will concede, and if it will go to court and all that, we shall see. But for now, that has been called in the mainstream media. What's your just initial reaction?
Well, I just hope for a smooth transition, and to have a smooth transition is really a blessing because we take that for granted. And we'll probably get into talking about traveling, but it gives you a perspective on how other countries, they wish they had something as smooth as that, with all the problems and shortcomings of the American system, being that it's kind of like an empire, and but to have a smooth transition from one side to the other. But of course, there's a few other court proceedings and things that might have to ensue, and people want transparency. But the biggest worry I have is just violence. So I would like to, just encourage everybody to just keep calm at this time, Amen, and let the officials work it out, man.
I know that's right. Today's date is Saturday, November 7th, and we're coming to you from Middle Eastern time, which is actually 8 p.m. tonight, and today's Saturday night. It's actually the weekend over here in the Middle East, and we're getting ready to go back to work tomorrow. So Jibril, man, it's good to have you on the show. Each one of our episodes, we have a segment called World Call. And this is when we give our guests 10 seconds to name off some of the countries that we've been to. Someone like yourself already know it's going to take you maybe 10 minutes to do that. But we do have guests that are just, beginning travelers. So it's good to have a comparison. So we're going to put you on the World Call, and you have 10 seconds to name off some of the countries that you've been to. Ready? Let's get ready for the World Call. Go.
Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Bolivia, Montevideo, Uruguay, Switzerland, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, Mozambique, South Africa, Sudan.
Oh, mashallah, man. I like the fact you started off in South America and just went all the way to the Middle East and Africa, man. South America sounds really cool. So you have extensive travels, man. I mean, I don't think that we had a person on our show yet that has traveled as much as you have. So, why don't you just share some of your experiences, like about traveling across the world and international travel? Like, what kind of was your motivation to travel and see the world? And, can you describe a little bit of what you've seen?
Sure. Bismillah, in the name of God, the merciful benefactor. You and I were raised in a kind of similar milieu. Our parents were already globe, trotters. And for their time, they were transcending a lot of the boundaries that were there for the generation that preceded them, their parents and their grandparents. So we're kind of like second generation expats, you and I. And so it wasn't really a big deal for us to get our passports. And we always had those ready. You and I have had passports since we were little kids. And I think only about like 80 million Americans have any passports at any given time ready to travel. So out of a country out of 300 million, it's a select few. I wasn't really motivated by anything other than just I wanted to experience what the world had to offer. So it wasn't in one particular direction that I wanted to travel. I was willing to, at one time I had a goal to visit every country, as wild as that sounds. And I think the United Nations, it goes up and down. Sometimes it's around 196 countries. And then there's a bunch of other territories that don't have their own national sovereignty, but 196 is a lot. So I'm far short of that. But you and I, we both played basketball, and we had some success doing that. So my first real international venture abroad solo was to Germany in the second division there, the Bundesliga. and I ended up having a really good time. And that was like my first exposure of, living abroad, working abroad, and just being identified as this American person, like this archetype. You'd meet people, you're speaking to them in English, and you're convinced that, these people are geniuses because they speak 3, 4, 5 languages, and their English is just as good as yours,
Yeah.
maybe with an accent.
Yeah.
But you start thinking outside the American paradigm a little bit, and you realize I need to kind of step up and learn a second language myself. So
Mhm.
Germany was my first, and I think I was also really impressed with Turkey.
Mhm.
I remember going there on the training camp one time and spent about 2 weeks, and that was a very impressive country. I've been back several times since then to Turkey. It's one of my favorite places, actually.
Mhm.
You've
So,
been
man,
there, haven't you?
I'm planning to go here maybe after the new year. So we were trying, we had all of our itinerary booked and everything, flights booked and everything, and then April comes around, and obviously we have to cancel all of our flights during the Corona madness.
Mm,
So looking forward to it though. It's something that was always been on our radar, and being so close to Turkey is just like something that you have to do. I mean, it's only like a 4-hour flight from Qatar, so it's nonstop direct. So we're gonna plan to
right.
to go there after the new year, inshallah.
And where we are now, I'm calling you from Kuwait, and
Right.
you're in Qatar. And a couple hundred years ago, we were under the aegis of the Ottoman Empire. So I mean, it spanned all this territory.
Mm-hmm.
So visiting in Turkey is kind of like visiting the capital, in some
Mm-hmm.
senses. And before that, an entire civilization preceded that. That was the capital for the Byzantines. So I mean, there's so much history and culture there. Beautiful people too.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna go take a look at it and look and see what it has to all to offer, man. So, can you just tell a little bit about how these experiences, like have cultivated into you to the person that you are today? Like these valuable experiences. I mean, not too many people. We could open up a textbook and read about all these different civilizations and all these different countries and cultures and stuff. But when you actually go there and you put your eyes on the scene and actually meet people, local people, and eat the food and experience the culture and the traditions. I mean, it's a really, really valuable, and it's really something that you really just don't tend to forget. And all these different experiences kind of mold you into the person that you have become. Would you agree with that? And could you just elaborate that a little bit further?
Yeah, one thing I like about the Arabic language is it's an inflected language and it's rich. And the word for travel in Arabic is safar. And when you look up the meaning of that word, it means to peel back the layers.
Mm,
And I identify with that because when you travel and you don't have the amenities you're used to, the home cooking,
hmm
or as we say in basketball, that home cooking, the referees give you a couple of extra calls here and there, and you
hmm
got the crowds and the fans and the energy. When you don't have that home field advantage and you don't have the language and you don't have the geography mapped in your mind, you don't know how to interact with the police, so you have a lot of heightened awareness that you're not used to having. They say you keep your head on a swivel.
hmm
um, so being outside of your comfort zone is really good for you. I mean, your cortisol levels will be high the
hmm
first time. You're excited, you're taking selfies, you're trying to take it all in. But I think after you start traveling extensively, you start to realize that the human condition is one. And that even though you might traverse across the globe and the languages and the cultures might change, humans are humans.
hmm
And there's an essential, quality to humans. And I would say it leans towards the good.
hmm
And that most people you meet are really decent.
hmm
And, the negative and the criminals amongst us, I would say, are the few.
hmm
And you kind of find this common decency. One of the places you see that is when you're in airports, when you are taking off your shoes, when you're getting sniffed by dogs, and you're kind of treated as a threat to security. But you notice how people have such good comportment. They kind of all keep smiles on their faces, and they're generally like amicable.
hmm
Uh, and I think travel does that to you. It kind of humbles you a little bit. I mean, there's highlights too, but there's also a lot of like dead time in between taking that train or taking that plane or that transfer or that 12-hour layover or taking that nap in an uncomfortable position. You have your neck, concocted to the left, and you get a hitch the next day, and all these kind of things. Not having your soap, not having your cologne. having to use, toilets that are maybe lower than our hygienic standards, and all of that kind of puts you into a nice place mentally and physically where you really just start appreciating what you have, and we grew up in the States and we took a lot of that for granted.
Absolutely, man. And then one thing I've learned too is like you might plan, I plan, we have a flight to catch at 8 o'clock, and then we're gonna go check in the hotel at 3, and then the car's gonna pick us up, and then we have dinner on this, but not all the time things go according to plan. So one thing I've learned, is to be adaptable and then have a lot of patience when you're traveling as well. Where at first maybe I wasn't like that because we were so, into our own coming from the West and everything and how we want everything our way. But things don't really go your way. You kind of have to adapt to it and really relax and really have a lot of patience towards it because you are, experiencing different cultures and stuff. And one thing I can say off the top of my head is, I don't know if you ever experienced this traveling Africa, but it takes so long for the food to come out. It takes so long for the food to come out. But when the food comes out, it tastes amazing. So it's like, man, when you're hungry, you can't just go to Africa, sit down in a restaurant hungry because you're going to drive yourself absolutely insane. So it's something like, if I'm coming back to the hotel, I might go look at the menu, order, then go up, take my shower, get my clothes on, and come back down to dinner. And then you're going to still wait another half hour for the food to come out. But this is the patience and those experiences. Yeah.
Can I get into Sudan? Because that reminds me of the time we were in Sudan. Because they went back there and they slaughtered those sheep in front of us, man.
Yeah.
And we watched them curate the meat and everything, and that was a great culinary experience. I can never forget that.
Yeah, they come out with the big platters of the
big
sheep.
Platter,
yeah, it was really good food.
And the
man.
rice, raisins, succulent. Yeah, that's another thing. Americans, things that bind people, to stay away from like political issues or controversial issues. You don't have to have that scope of conversation with people. You can interact and talk about things like food, and you can have deep conversations just about something like that, culinary, exchanges. And it's actually kind of safe and recommended to do that when you first get into traveling, because you don't know the political sphere you're in. You don't know the taboos. You don't know if you're offending somebody. And we've offended many of people by just doing things we think are culturally appropriate, and they're totally inappropriate. And I'd say most people are quite forgiving because, we're doing major offenses by the way we do our hand gestures or the way we might raise our voice to a certain modality or something like that. Americans will argue over a call in basketball. Man, that ain't no foul, but to do that to somebody else, he sees that as maybe something violent, So, we had to work on that.
Absolutely. So you and your family have been living abroad since like 2008. So that's what? Wow, that's a long time, man. Long time,
right?
Man. So
a long time.
What are some things when you're overseas or that you miss about being back home? Like,
well, it's changed over the years because as the technology has changed, in media studies, they say there's two dominant philosophies. There's technological determinism, like our future is determined by the way technology moves, and they balance that with cultural determinism, like our culture will decide how we use the technology and we will be in charge of our future. And they kind of oscillate and bounce back to each other. But the technology, when we first came abroad, my first time abroad was 2002 and 3. And so the internet was not as ubiquitous. You couldn't just land at an airport, pick up a SIM card, put it in your iPhone or whatever kind of phone and just make calls back home, video calls.
Everywhere.
Couldn't do that.
Yeah.
So I was back in the old days where you have like physical maps and you're like
the book. No, Lonely Planet. Lonely Planet. Yeah.
Right. I remember printing out. I was with my wife. My wife and I backpacked around a lot of different countries. So we've done the kind of first class type of tours, and we've done the medium class, and then we've also done like the very budget travel. And I recommend, try all three. But I remember one time we were in China, and at that time, you couldn't really get access to the internet unless you went to those cafes, those internet cafes, and people might not know what those are. But in some countries where Wi-Fi is still not penetrated, that's still a phenomenon. Like places like Nicaragua, they call it the cyber cafe. So I remember being in China and having a whole list of things printed out, and I'm trying to pronounce them in Mandarin, and I'm obviously butchering it, and I'm trying to hold up the sign to the guy, and I'm telling him vegetarian, and then that doesn't work, and then I'm like, no meat, and then that doesn't work, and just being stuck in translation. And you couldn't just go to Google Translate like the way you do now, and some of the apps even better than Google Translate. So I'm glad I experienced those harder days of travel, and now I appreciate these easier times of travel. Maybe you want to get into how COVID has changed that a bit. I traveled back this summer with my family and I, and we thought it might be really difficult because we were expecting it to be, complicated. But we flew through Qatar Airlines, and I have to give them, 10 out of 10 because the service was top notch. Of course, they were really strict about, masks and taking PCR tests and things like that. And it took a little bit longer than usual, but not by much, And a lot of the people came up and they thanked us like profusely. They told us, we appreciate you not having fear to fly because we're about to get laid off. And, if we don't get people back confident enough to use our services, we're not going to be. Right. Furlough is coming, and furlough is coming quick.
Yeah.
So I felt actually good, like flying and traveling. It was about 40% capacity on the flight both ways. We flew back to California and back here.
Yeah. So what did you experience when you went back home? Obviously, we're living in some really strange times now, but because we have a life overseas, but the life that you grew up with back home, that's always going to be a part of you. But you kind of see how you have changed since then. And when you go back, it's like sometimes I feel like I'm going back in time because my homeboys, doing the same stuff, or it's kind of like they're just, you almost see, like, hate to say it, but they're in a rat race, right? They're just running on the treadmill, running in place. But you have, like you said, experienced China and South America and Africa and all these places. So you're like, your analysis of the world is like very, very broad, whereas somebody who's still living in California might have taken road trips up an I-5 or shoot over to Vegas or something, but they just didn't have the enriching experiences that you have had. So you want to touch a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would say that, we're blessed to be able to do what we do. And part of that is just something that's divine. But another part of that is humans have agency. So you have more agency as an American citizen passport holder than kids that you and I might encounter in Ethiopia. I remember seeing kids there with one shoe on, and it wasn't a one-time phenomenon. And I remember having a bankroll of money, and I had a certain amount allocated to give to them. And I remember being like, there's so many thousands of kids in front of me that I can't break them all off. There's not enough money to fix this situation, and your heart breaks, know.
I've had that same exact experience, brother. Same exact experience. When I went to Ethiopia, and literally there's like a centipede of kids, following me around from every store. And I know that what I have in my pocket could definitely help these young individuals out. But, but then there's, like you said, that, there's so much more, for every, and it was really, really heartbreaking, really humbling. And it was. So
what I'll do is I'll be a little bit stern and harsh on my brothers from back home because they don't understand the opulence that they're living in. And I have to kind of put them in check sometimes. Like you said, they're still living that same lifestyle. And you see people and you tell them, man, look, brother, you are living better than the King of England lived 100 years ago. When you want a certain type of food, you can snap a finger and click some buttons on your phone. Uber Eats will have it at your door, whether it's from Thailand or it's from Mexico. You have a phone and you have access to all kind of global, peer-reviewed research right on your hand. So it's how you spend your time, how you better yourself. Do you stay up and watch ESPN highlights for 2 hours here? Do you spend 2 hours doing this and that, 2 hours doing this and that? Or are you managing your time properly to try to better yourself, as they call professional development, in the business world, and you try to build on that? Because there's no reason that at 45, 55, or 65 that you can't kind of correct some of these habits and use that American passport, which is like gold. I mean, people will literally, and you can corroborate this, they will literally give their left arm, right arm, left leg for an American passport all across the world. And you're sitting with one in your pocket and you might have never even used it. You might have just been to, Cabo or something like that.
Yeah.
Or some people never left the States, period.
Yeah.
And so I would say, you kind of have a responsibility. You owe it to yourself. Life is really short, to at least try to traverse those borders one time and take a lesson, and do better for the next generation. So I would encourage people, but I'm kind of coming heavy-handed saying, if you haven't utilized that passport, you need to utilize that, because you could have been born in Ethiopia and your passport doesn't give you access to anywhere. And so you really are limited. You really are, really don't have fair opportunities. And we know the urban versus the suburban versus the rich kids, riding horses, golf class is not the same as some of the neighborhoods you and I used to stay in. And, people kind of fall into these habits, but they still have a better opportunity because they have that passport and they have access to things like, community colleges. These things aren't available all around the world. So I would say the resources are all around you, but you just have to have the mindset. And the mindset is the hardest thing to get, really.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. I remember my ex-teammate, man. He's from Mauritania, and obviously he's not highly educated. He probably has maybe a high school education, but the man speaks 8 different languages. And one time I was sitting back with him, and he was talking about how he would rather trade my American English fluency as opposed to having his 8 different languages. He speaks a little bit of French, he speaks a little bit of Arabic, Fulani, his like 3 or 4, Berber, and about 2 or 3 other local dialects. And I was just like, wow, that really, really shocked me, because here I am, I'm thinking, how interesting it is to learn another language, and how impressed I am with him. But he's saying, like, I'll trade all that stuff for your English. I was just saying, well, there obviously must be a reason why he's thinking that, and it probably has some validity to it. So again, it should be something that we should be conscious of, and something that we shouldn't take for granted.
Right, no doubt about it. To get a little bit into the geopolitics of it all, America is like an empire. In human history, you have empires, they rise and they fall. Ibn Khaldun wrote a book about that. What are the patterns of why they rise and why they fall? The Chinese also have a saying about that, which is like the first generation works really hard, the second generation kind of like takes advantage of that, and the third generation spends it all and goes back broke. So it's cyclical. And we see that China is rising quickly.
Definitely.
And we see that they have a different set of values. And although America has values that we can criticize for many aspects, and I can enumerate to you a lot of things that I take issue with, as you get older and wiser, you realize that we really have it really good. And with all of the faults that America has as a system, it's an in progress situation. And each generation inherits this chance to try to make it better. And sometimes we fall behind and sometimes we do better. With a rising China competing for that number 1 spot, it behooves us to get more civically involved. Their set of values, there's obviously a lot of merits with Chinese people, but their system, being that it's a communist party, it wouldn't provide the same amount of flexibility that we have now as Americans. And we should really appreciate what we have, because the circumstances can change at any time. There's a major, his name is Robert Spalding, and he wrote a book about how China's plan to raise up to the top quickly is going right as planned, and probably earlier as planned. But we can learn a lot from the Chinese. I mean, they worked really hard and they got out of poverty quickly. Because China, if I'm not mistaken, maybe one of your guests can confirm, it means center of the world in their language. And for 5,000 years, they were the center of the world. And they see it as like they had an unlucky century, and America got lucky for 1 century, and they're right back on track to be on top for another 5,000 years. So Americans have to kind of know what's happening geopolitically to know, like, man, I'm living in one of the best times in human history, and I'm in the empire. Yeah, we might be a little bit declining, but it's still a great opportunity for me to live a very valued life,
Absolutely, absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest today is Dr. Jibril Latif. Make sure that if you like this interview, make sure you go down and hit that subscribe button down in the description. We'll keep on bringing you new episodes with many wonderful guests from all across the world. Also, follow us on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, at Azomco Global. And if you like this little fresh hat I'm wearing, think global hat and think global products, you can visit us online at azomco.com. So Jibril, I want to circle back to you, ask this question really, which is, this is the foundation of this show, and this is really why I kind of wanted to go with this whole entire episode. Why don't you think more Americans travel more internationally abroad? What do you think about it? I mean, I know lots of people will travel state to say. Granted, America is big. I mean, you can go from California to New York to Georgia to Texas, and you have completely different experiences. The Midwest and Montana and places like that have really beautiful scenery. But why do you think about it that people don't want to cross the pond or go down to South America? I mean, you know, they do have probably less vacation time than the professionals in Europe. But I still think it's more of like a drive or a conscious awareness about the rest of the world. You mentioned China thinking that China is the center of the world. It's almost like Americans think it's the same way, right? Very encapsulated and thinking that, you know, why should I go anywhere? I live in America. It's the greatest country on earth.
Yeah. You know, I've thought a lot about this question. And I think you just pretty much answered it with, you know, the different threads you touched on. One of them is that there's an implicit bias we have when we are raised there, that we're the best and that we are the pinnacle. And, you know, philosophers have written books about the end of history, you know, the end of history, meaning that liberal democracy in this American form, capitalism, is the end of human evolution. We found the best model. So America being that it's the center of that, why go anywhere? And why go somewhere else where you're not going to be, you know, in the same amenities? Mm-hmm. But as we both know, America might not be one of the top 10 places to be treated in certain aspects, right? So you might have better time off in Europe. You might have 2 months off per year. And then you might say, okay, I might make the same money or a little bit less money in the States, but why would I not want to live in a country where I can have 2 months off a year and I'm encouraged to travel internationally versus living in America where I'm working really hard 50 weeks a year and I only have 2 weeks off. And then those 2 weeks, I'm too tired to really like book a flight. So that is one excuse that Americans give me, which is they don't have enough time off. And I think that that's a problem that they should address. And that's a legislation issue. You have to kind of lobby, you know, people in politics to kind of open up these doors for better, time off. Another reason is that, like I said, only less than 100 million have the passport. To go through the process, it takes some initiative. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you the third reason, which I think was touched on by one of the scholars that a lot of people like this book about. It's called Triple Package by Amy Chua, if I'm pronouncing her name right. And she talked about what gave people this mindset when they come to America that they achieve. So she talks about all these different kind of people, like Nigerians. When they come to America, they differ than the African Americans who are descendants of slavery. When they come to Nigeria, they immediately, within a few years, they succeed financially and every other kind of way. So she says, what is it about Nigerians? Is it in their DNA? Is it biological? What's a mindset? And one of those things is they know who they are. So they always have like a tribal affiliation, and they have religion, and they teach that to each other. So they might have a religion that's been going back for 1,000 years. So they know who they are and their identity, and they have a tradition that they pass down. Americans don't really have a tradition. We're like a melting pot, an amalgamation of people from Europe and people from all over the world. And it's changing so quickly so that it's kind of hard to have a past that we all share. What's the definition of a nation state? There's different ones, but one is you share a language, right? I wouldn't even say we share one specific language anymore.
Depends on where you're at, right? Because Florida and California, you're going to get something different.
Right. The other thing is that you would share either a memory of the past, the same kind of traditions, or fables, or something about the past that binds together.
The memories of the past can be discreetly different for two people. I mean, talk about African American memory of the past, and maybe a Caucasian American memory of the past. There's a big difference right there.
Social fabric is starting to kind of fall a little bit apart in that sense. So we have to redefine and reassert what is it that binds us together? So I'm not really sure what all the answers are, but I think we touched on all the threads, which is there's a financial part there. There's a fear of traveling outside. There's also a bias that we're better, so why even travel outside? You know, and then there's also that other aspect to where it's like, well, where am I going to go? Where are my roots? And I encourage everybody who does those 23andMe type of DNA tracing pursuits, you know, they spit in the cup and then it comes back and then they message me excited. Hey man, I got part of my ancestry from Gambia. I'm like, well, go to Gambia, man, you know, check it out. And that will give you a motivation because people don't really know where they're from. And it's nice to kind of walk that back in history, you know?
Yeah, that's deep, man, that you said people don't know where you're from. I think really that's really the only population of people who that is the case. Correct me if I'm wrong though. What do you think?
Well, it just depends how long you go back. You go back long enough, everybody's mixed at some point, you know. And there's different theories on who's the first, you know, person, but it all kind of looks at Africa, you know. But you know, all people are always moving and everything is always fluid at all times. But these new borders, this is a new concept, you know, the nation state and identifying with a passport instead of a language or a religion or a tribe. This is all new. So it's like a human, you know, experiment. So we're trying to work it out. You know, there's still violence, you know, here and there around the world, but compared to maybe 300 years ago, it's less violent, if that's easy to believe.
Yeah, it's funny that you brought up violence because this is another question I wanted to speak with you about. I mean, I'm sure you have these conversations with your partners back home, but if you say, "Hey, I'm living in Kuwait, or I'm living in the Middle East," they're gonna say, "Oh, well, isn't that dangerous? You don't feel scared? Like there's stuff, bombs are going off and stuff, man." I'm like, no, I'm scared when I go back home to the west end of Atlanta. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's violent, man. Like, you know what I'm saying? But you want to touch upon that? Like, just like the concept of, you know, when you're living right next door, you're in the inner city down in most of the major American neighborhoods and stuff, and the violence that occurs there as opposed to stuff happening overseas.
Yeah, statistically, we're much safer off in the Middle East. I know that sounds absurd. Because, you know, being that the media is so profound and the impact that it has on our human psyche is almost ununderstandable. You can't understand how much this affects us. So there's a word called cognitive framing. And cognitive framing means that the way that I show the person, the way that I hold the camera, and the way that I connect them to either violence or peace or prosperity or poverty, it sticks in your mind and your cognition, how you remember that individual. And we all pretty much use stereotypes in our minds and we have these frames in there. So there's a scholar, his name is Jack Shaheen. He's a, you know, Arab American, and he did an amazing service. He watched every single film that ever depicted Arabs in the entire 20th century. And he wrote down the scenes of what Arab did and what scene and what his name was and what his character was. And it was overwhelmingly, I'm talking like almost 100% negative depictions, you know, and there's phases. So it kind of went through like the oil chic of the, you know, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And then it went through like the big nose, the criminal with the dagger. And then, you know, and then post 9/11 or pre 9/11, even the 90s. And then it was like the terrorist, you know.
True Lies,
and, right. So we grew up in that milieu. We grew up watching that and we internalized that, even you and I. And we knew people from the Middle East and from Africa, and we were more exposed, but still we carried those things and they're deep down, they're ingrained in you. And so when you tell somebody, hey man, I've been to Kuwait, I've been to Qatar, I've been to Bahrain, I've been to Saudi Arabia, I've been to Morocco, and you're just naming off all these places that they connect with violence. And you're like, you know what? I never had to carry a firearm. I never needed security. I've never felt in danger, not one time. But just last summer, when I was on the streets of LA, you know, I had to exercise my Second Amendment right. And I'm not even really that type of character, you know, but just out of caution that, you know, with other people around here are armed, you know, maybe it's necessary that I should be armed. And it's unfortunate that we have to feel like that.
But that's a reality. So yeah. Okay, man. As we wrap up this interview, I just want to circle back. You mentioned earlier in this segment, you talked about Arabic and you talked about learning a new language. One thing that I've really been impressed with you about is your ability to recall information, right? And that kind of goes along with like or learning a new language. I remember when I was going to play Brazil, I got the call from my agent. I was so excited. I went to my mom and said, "I'm going to Brazil. I'm going to Brazil. I have to learn Spanish and do this and do this." And like, like not until I get down there, they realize that they speak Portuguese. But I did all right, learning Portuguese.
Yeah.
But it was like kind of just being thrown into it where I don't have a choice. My teammates don't speak English. Only one of my coaches speak. All the taxi drivers, you go into the restaurants, the apartment complex, everybody around you only speaks Portuguese. So you hear a word here, then you follow it, and you have actions. You kind of associate actions with vocabulary. So eventually you start building up. Though my grammar's not perfect, but when I came to the Middle East, I really wanted to learn Arabic, but I kind of got discouraged because of the different dialects and the fact that as a complete opposite of when I was in Brazil, where everybody forced you to speak Portuguese. Here, everybody wants to speak English with you. I mean, they, if you,
Mm.
joke, you say, "Oh yeah, Cape Halik," you're speaking Arabic. Okay, how you doing? They don't really want to
Yes.
speak with the American Arabic. So, can you just tell me about your transition to becoming a fluent Arabic speaker?
That's a long story,
Yeah, I
but
know.
fluency is, I wouldn't really say I'm a mutqin, which is how they say fluent, but you know, you have to fall in love with the language. There has to be an intrinsic motivation.
Hmm.
And because it's one of the hardest things in life to do is
Hmm.
to think differently, because once you start dreaming in a language, now you're interacting with its nomenclature. But
Hmm.
until that point, until you have a dream in a language, you're not really active in it. A lot of people have told me that. So you have to learn the grammar, and you have to have a lot of humiliating moments,
Hmm.
because there's a fear of making a mistake.
Hmm.
And a lot of people's ego tells them that it's not worth going through all those humiliating moments. I had a similar situation to you, because the team that I first played for when I was here
Hmm.
didn't really speak English, and that was really to my benefit,
Hmm.
because right off the bat you have this nice working vocabulary, but it's
Hmm.
all like pass, shoot,
Yeah.
get out of my way, stop,
Yeah.
and so you can't talk about a mechanic, you can't talk about an engineer, you can't
Yeah.
order your food, but you can foul and
Yeah.
screen and shoot and do all that. It's really funny.
Yeah.
But then after that I took a couple of courses, and I
Hmm.
just had to humble myself. You sit on the floor sometimes, sit
Yeah.
with kids.
Yeah.
You start from the ABCs, or we say the Aleph Beta, which,
Hmm.
if you think about it, Alpha Beta. I mean, this
Hmm.
is old knowledge, the Arabic language.
Hmm.
Some people say that it's the oldest language. And in
Hmm.
fact, I mean, I'm going a little academic here. Noah Webster, he's the first American to put out a dictionary. We all
Hmm.
know the Webster
Webster
Dictionary.
Dictionary.
And he was a very pious religious man, and he wanted to like set out to find out what was the oldest language. So he studied 28 languages. Can you
Hmm.
believe that?
Mm.
So he was really interested in Hebrew because it's the biblical language.
Yeah.
And he wanted to like conclude at the end of his life that Hebrew was the oldest. And he said, you know what? That was my pursuit, but I have to concur that I think Arabic is actually the oldest language that I can find. So, I
Wow.
mean, we're talking about, it's a really deep language. uh, the letters all have different kind of meanings to them. Like if you say the word sheen, which is like sh in English,
Hmm.
any word that it has a sheen in it
Mm.
has movement in it. So like a tree,
Mm.
shajara, a
Mm.
tree's branches come out.
Mm.
Thanks from me to you, shukr. So
Mm.
I thank you.
Mm.
Bravery, shuja'a. I'm
Mm.
brave. I jump into the battle. My friends jump in. So I
Mm.
mean, this type of level that Arabic is working on, once you kind of crack that code and you get into it, it takes a lot of work. Sometimes you're 4 or 5 hours a day in that dictionary, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's a beautiful language. All
So,
languages are beautiful.
so just talk a little bit about how after you've, obviously you studied a lot and it's been a lot of sessions and you have a lot of hard work that you have, but after you have like a good grasp on it, how does it help you navigate through a foreign country that you're living in? I mean, does it make it easier for you or does it make you harder? I remember the reason why I'm asking is because when I was in Holland, right, I was playing with a guy named Stanley O'City. Shout out to Stanley if you're watching this video, man. Stan the man. He was like 6'10", right, and his father was a photographer. He was Ugandan, right? But his father was a photographer, and he was employed in the Netherlands. And Stanley was born there, so he had a Dutch passport. So Stanley was 6'10" and very, very dark. He looked like a dark African guy, but he spoke Dutch. And so when we go to the restaurant sometime, he was just like, we'd be talking and talking, talking. All of a sudden he'll go quiet. Like, what's up with you, Stan? You know, he was like, man, you never believe what these people are saying about me at the table next to me. I was like, oh man, that's crazy. And they were just talking about, like, you look at this black ugly guy, this, and you know. And that's one thing about language. Like, you never know. There's no way that you and I can just look at the face and say that, oh, I think that you speak Spanish and French. Yeah, you look like a Spanish and French speaker, or you know, this, that, and the other. You know, so you have to really be respectful in that manner. But I remember that was like one drawback that he like could understand, you know, and people didn't think that he could understand. Hey, you ever been in a situation like that, or how does it help you navigate?
Yeah, I could go on about situations like that, because if I want to play victim, man, I'm the victim all the time. Because being that my father's African American and my mother is from Spanish descent, I fit under the paradigm of a person who looks Arab. If I'm on this side of the world, and if I'm in the States, I fit under the paradigm of a Hispanic or a Puerto Rican. Okay. So think about all my travels. When I would go to Central and South America, they would identify me as a Spanish speaker. Because my Spanish isn't fluent, you know, we studied it. There's this power dynamic where you play this power game. So first it's like, okay, the person speaking to you might speak to you, and you might reply back in not as good of language, or you might reply back in English. Now you're playing a power dynamic with him, saying, well, I'm from the empire and you want to speak my language anyway. So sometimes this language has power to it. Similarly, in the Middle East, I look like I might be from Morocco or Egypt, because both times I go to those countries, everyone says, you know, you're from here, man, you made it. And so being outside of those two Arab speaking countries, if I'm in the Gulf, for example, the Gulf people might see me as an Egyptian and speak to me in a Kuwaiti accent. But if I reply to them back in a Kuwaiti accent, now they think I'm trying to mess with them, because they might say, why are you an Egyptian speaking back to me? And are you making fun of me? You know, it'd be like if I'm from Boston and you're from LA, and I hear you say LA lingo, and I'm mimicking you. You think I'm making fun. And I'm just saying, no, I love the language. I learned it to speak just like you, you know? So there's this power dynamic. And then when you jump back into English, now you put the empire back into it. Well, like, you know, we colonized you and all that. So there's dynamics, man. There's levels to it, you know?
Man, that's awesome though, man. Yeah, that's awesome, man. That's awesome. All right, man. Well, won't keep you for too long. I just wanted to have some final conclusions. Make sure that you subscribe to the Think Global podcast, you guys, and follow us on social media. And what's next for you, Jibril? I mean, how long you guys are planning to stay out there?
Man, I love it out here. As long as they'll host me, I'll keep considering the opportunity. You know, we're here teaching at a nice tech school. Shout out to Gus. And, you know, some good people out here. And my kids are loving the experience. And we're trying to immerse them, and we're teaching them multi languages at the same time. We're trying to, you know, give them the best opportunity. And you know, we visit home every year, so it's not like we're gone for a long at a time. You know, we come back every 10 months or so. But I would like to try to stay if I could out here for a while. And we never know, man. You know, God puts you in certain situations and you just kind of go with it, you know.
I guarantee, 15 years ago, you wouldn't be thinking that you'd be living in Kuwait right now. That's for sure. So just take it as it comes, doesn't it?
Yeah, and really in this part of my life, having children, the most important thing for me is them, their happiness, their safety. And they like it because they're born here. They don't know anything different. They see the States as a place like to visit, and after a few weeks, they're kind of itching to get back to their friends and their, swimming pool times, and they kind of miss it. So I'm seeing it as we're going home, and they're seeing it as a vacation. So it's interesting.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
All right, spot on, ladies and gentlemen. My guest today has been Dr. Jibril Latif, live from Kuwait on November 7th. Thank you for listening, and then we'll catch you again. We'll bring you back on the show next time, Jibril. Appreciate you, man.
My pleasure, man. I appreciate you, man.
All right, be safe, man.
All right, man.
All right, peace.